Hello, welcome back to our discussions. Today, we'll be discussing with you the origin and the history of the season of Advent. We'll only highlight the main points. In our first conversation, we looked at the general overview of the season of Advent and placed it within the context of the church's calendar. Today, being the first week of the season, we are looking at our origin and the history, because the knowledge of history is important for understanding the way we live today. Now, the origin of Advent as a season is linked to the celebration of Christmas. Let us recall that Easter is the first annual feast or festival of the Christian faith. It started with the apostles, so we say that it is of apostolic origin. And that is the first and the most important festival of the Christian church. Christmas, as a feast to celebrate the coming of Christ into the world, appeared in Rome in the middle of the 4th century, after Christianity became legalized in the Roman Empire by the Emperor Constantine. So after Easter, Christmas is the second most important religious festival of the church. But per the civil calendar and even the church's calendar, Christmas is celebrated first. But it's ranked second in terms of importance. Historically, Christmas was introduced into the Roman Church in response to the pagan feast of Saturnalia. That is the feast of the unconquerable sun, as instituted by the Emperor Aurelian, who was the Roman emperor from 270 AD to 275 AD. And this feast, instituted by Emperor Aurelian, was to be celebrated on December 25. He did it as a means of unifying the Roman Empire around one major religious festival. At the time that the feast of Saturnalia was introduced, Christianity was a persecuted religion until the Edict of Milan in 313 AD by the Emperor Constantine. If I say edict, I mean the law. And because it was promulgated in the city of Milan, it is referred to as the Edict of Milan. This Edict of Milan decriminalized Christianity and granted religious liberty to all religions. So everyone was free to practice the religion of his or her choice. Though it was a freedom granted to all religions, or to the practice of every religion within the empire, the greatest beneficiary of this edict was Christianity. So with this newly found freedom, the church grew rapidly and started worshiping in public places. Now, the church, according to Adolf Adam in his book, The Liturgical Year, said, in order to immunize Christians against the attraction of these pagan feasts, the church established the feast of Christ's birth and superimpose it on the feast of the sun, which was celebrated as the light of the world. Christianity, in creating these new feasts of Christ, used texts from Holy Scripture as a basis for instituting this feast. And in this feast, we celebrate the birth of Christ, not just as the light, like the sun, but the true light of the world. The first of the scriptural bases used by the church was the messianic prophecies of Malachi in the Old Testament, whose reference to the Son of Righteousness, Son, S-U-N, of righteousness, that's in chapter 4, verse 2. This text, interpreted in conjunction with chapter 3, has been referred to Jesus as being prophesied. The New Testament text used as the additional scriptural basis were John chapter 8, verse 2, where Jesus described himself as the light of the world. And also the prologue of John, where he, Christ, is referred to as the true light that enlightens everyone. That's John chapter 1, verse 9. These texts, among others, provided the scriptural foundation for the celebration of Christmas, the celebration of Christ as the true light, whose birth into the world is being celebrated in the context of the Mass. And this brief historical background also teaches us the origin of the name Christmas for this feast, because it originally means Christ's Mass, or the Mass of Christ, the Mass celebrating Christ's birth, hence Christmas. As already stated, the main purpose of instituting this feast to celebrate the birth of Christ is to draw Christians away from the celebration of this pagan feast so as not to compromise their faith. Now, once the Feast of Christmas was firmly established, there eventually emerged the need for a preparatory period, as it happened in the case of Easter, that has Lent as a preparatory season. It was this preparatory season, which we now call Advent, did not come overnight. For a long time, there was a great deal of diversity among the major churches in the Roman Empire, or some parts of the Roman Empire, as to the number of weeks the season is to last, and the manner in which it is to be observed. We can recall that the Council of Saragossa decreed in 380 AD that the feast of Christmas be preceded by 3-week fast. On the other hand, sometime before 491 AD, the Diocese of Tours practiced a fast of 3 days in 3 weeks, beginning November 11 and ending on the Feast of Epiphany. A century later, this fast was extended to more dioceses, or to all dioceses in France. by the First Council of Macon in 581. The observance of Advent then continued to spread even into England. Evidence of pre-Christmas fasts emerged in northern Italy at the end of the 4th century. So we see that the length of the season of Advent and its observance took a long time to become unified. Now, Advent is basically a liturgical celebration. In other words, it is celebrated within the context of the church's liturgy. And as we all know, the Mass is the most important liturgical celebration of the church. Now, the first traces of Advent as a preparation for Christmas within the context of the liturgy started in Spain and in Gaul. When we say Gaul, it is now modern France and parts of Belgium and present-day Italy. In this land of Gaul and Spain, it also started as a period of fast to prepare for the Feast of Epiphany, which actually is the original feast of Christ coming into the world. The oldest document attesting to Advent as a time for preparation, liturgical preparation, is the regulations on fasting issued by Bishop Perpetuus of Tours, who died in 490 AD. He called for 3 days of fasting per week from the Feast of St. Martin, which is now celebrated on the 12th of November, up to Christmas. The first traces of an Advent liturgy can be detected in the 5th century in Ravenna in northern Italy. By the middle of the 6th century, masses with Advent themes gained prominence in the Italian churches. Another important milestone that we can note in the history of Advent liturgy is taken under the papacy of Pope Gregory the Great, whose papacy lasted from 590 to 604 AD, whose sacramentary made purposely for the city of Rome contains 4 Sunday masses and 3 days of fasting as means of preparing to celebrate the incarnation of Christ. In other parts of the Roman Empire, notably in Gaul, which is modern-day France, there emerged shifts in the focus of the Advent themes, from preparation for the celebration of the birth of Christ to the parousia, that is, the expectation of the second coming of Christ at the end of time. This shift was probably due to the preaching of the Irish missionaries, who laid stress on the second coming of Christ to judge the world, and the need for doing penance before the final judgment. So this new trend turned Advent more into a penitential season than what it used to be, a joyful season, now becoming a penitential season. In view of this new shift, the Gloria, which is a joyful song, and the Alleluia were dropped from the liturgy. And the introduction of purple vestments by the priests, the violet, which is a penitential color. With this, Advent became a penitential season alongside Lent. This penitential character was transmitted from Gaul to the Roman liturgy in the 12th century. Rome, however, retained the Alleluia in the Advent liturgy, as it did not fully embrace Advent as a penitential season. A notable contribution of Rome to the historical evolution is the duration fixed for the season by establishing the 4-week duration. This 4-week duration, however, remained largely a Roman tradition until the 11th century, before it was generally accepted in Europe. So this is what pertains until the liturgical reforms of the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s and the early 70s, which gave the season of Advent its present form, duration, and practices. So with this, we come to a very brief historical origin of the season of Advent. We will continue again another time next week with the theological foundation of this season of Advent. And we will do that looking at the doctrinal teachings of the church, the doctrinal proclamation of the church, and the liturgical texts. Thank you very much for your attention. See you next week. Bye.